Welcome to this live. Um, it's been a lot this week, but I'm really happy to just have these conversations with a lot of people that I have so much love and respect for. Um, and yeah, I just wanted to read a little bit about our next guest. So Zoe is an art writer and PhD student in medical sociology at UC San Francisco with William C. Anderson. She is co-author of As Black as Resistance. Give it up for Zoe. And I'm the conversation. I'm so I'm so old, y'all. Like you have no idea. In spirit, you know. In spirit. And hi. Can you hear me?
Hey. Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Your hi, hello. How are people doing? um, yeah. So I just wanted to check in first and see how you were doing. You're in which area, which territory? Do you know?
I'm still figuring it out. Missouri is
Word. And
weird. There
also,
are
you don't
no
have to relinquish
federally
that.
recognized indigenous communities here.
Hmm.
Oh, well. Um, there are
Okay.
no federally recognized territories here. I know that historically, like the Osage have been here, the Sioux, the Missouri,
Mm,
and also a number of other people who were pushed west and then like forcibly resettled when the Indian Removal Act was legislated. So I'm still
word.
learning and I'm still reading and I'm still figuring that out. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Are you doing this on you're doing this on your phone, right?
Yeah.
There's a little bit of a lag. Um, if you were
Yeah.
to, you probably
I live out
would
in the middle
cut
of
out.
nowhere.
Um, okay. But if you're on your phone, you can put your phone on airplane mode and then put your Wi-Fi on, and that helps with just yeah, it helps with the signal a little bit more. Have you tried? Do you want to try that? They'll probably cut out, but are you gonna?
Second.
Okay,
I'm gonna do
okay,
that.
yeah, I'll just add you back in. You just got to request, and I'll add you back in. Oh, it worked. Okay.
Okay, give me 1 sec.
So yeah, I'm currently I haven't acknowledged where I am thus far, only because I guess yeah, it's cool. But I mean I'm in Tongva territory currently, also known as Los Angeles. Um and yeah, we're gonna see if back into the stream. It looks like they requested again. But thank you for not minding the technical difficulties we're having. Yeah, so Zoe, all you gotta do is request to have a conversation, or I can actually just add you right here. Yes. That's so cool. I'm glad yeah, I can just add people instead of waiting for them to uh request to be. But it is kind of nerve-wracking because hi.
I'm back. This is a lot better. Thank you. That was a great idea.
Yeah. Yeah, no, like I've been watching like in since COVID, just watching them and people have their pointers and I'm like, "Oh, yes," and just telling people But how are you doing? It's been so
I
long.
know. When was the
It,
last time I saw you? In like
I
26,
yeah,
17?
I was out in the Bay for I did an art thing with the Trans Life and Liberation art series,
Mm-hmm.
and I stayed at y'all's space for a second. And I have not. I don't think I may have been back once since then, but like in a there was like this black trans girls rule thing with a bunch of the girls in like 20, I want to say 18. And I
Okay.
was just, it was just work. It was just work.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah, yeah.
another time I was like arrested at the airport
Girl.
because well, le- I guess I'll just say that I forgot that someone put a expandable baton in my bag and they found it and I forgot about it, and like it was it was a mess.
That
And
sounds a
so
mess.
yeah, like at the airport they like remember me because like they're like, oh, you were the girl that got arrested for having that weapon. Like, yes, yes, that was me. I don't have anything now, but um yeah, so I haven't been back in a hot minute, and like comrades and friends and fam are always like, you should come out, and I want to, but it's just been like,
It's a lot.
yeah, it's a lot. I mean, I just need to, yeah, I need to just go on like a road trip or something. But yeah, I just want to check in about your mental health. What are you doing to take
Yeah.
care of yourself right now?
Um, Probably not. I'm not probably not taking as good of care as myself as I should be.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm in the last like intense stretch of writing my dissertation.
Oof.
Um, yeah, I'm trying to be
Oof.
out. I'm trying to be done. I'm trying to be out of here because I'm about to be in my 5th year.
Uh,
Um, and I'm ready to have the little doctor in front of my name and just work on other things related to my work that are actually like interesting and feel useful and exciting.
word, word.
Um,
Yeah, I don't know how y'all do it, cause like yeah, just deadlines. Deadlines are already so much pressure, and like I kind
Totally.
of fall apart when it comes to like even paid deadlines. It's just, yeah, it's a lot. So
Yeah.
good up on you for continuing that. We need, Black folks, writing critical theory in your field. You're in school right now? Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay.
Um, Kind of straddling medical sociology and genocide studies.
Oh shit. Okay.
Yeah.
Word, word, word. Well, I mean, it's all so relative to the moment, to
Mm.
just pandemic and
Mm-hmm.
police violence and anti-blackness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think yeah, I just really wanted to, I think you were the person that really helped me acknowledge and frame how pandemic just moves in ways that are catering to whiteness, catering to
Mm.
passport having,
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, like white European person, and how so many people are often, so many Black people are often affected by the fuck shit of Western Europeans, even when it comes to pandemic. I did wanna, I wanted to actually read the piece that helped, that I was talking about, that you actually wrote, and I don't. It's a chunk of a piece, but I want to just like, I think I'll read the last part of it because I essentially set up you know the get down. But you said um, Nigeria's first case was a man from Milan. South Africa's first case was a man who had traveled to Italy. Senegal's first case was from a French citizen. And now, in a stroke of the most terrible deja vu, the Democratic Republic of Congo's first case is a Congolese national coming from Belgium, the coloniality of international movement. Um, And that's really when I was just like, shit's gonna pop off. Like I was really like, yeah, shit's gonna pop off now, and like because it is the effects of it are so racialized. But I just wanted to, I guess, ask you what you're like. How did you? I don't know. Like, how did you come up with that assessment? Like, what have you been? You know.
I mean, so I was actually in Namibia still,
Mhm.
when everything was really, really popping off. And I think the first cases in Namibia were foreign nationals from
I might have it
either
written down actually.
they either traveled through Spain or were from Spain and were Eastern European or something, but they were these two white Europeans.
Right.
Those were the Namibia's first cases. And as I was like looking around the continent, um, so I think the first thing was actually not like looking at the travel to the continent. It was the whole, you know, this was when Italy was getting battered, and there were not so many cases in sub-Saharan Africa. I know there were a bunch in Egypt, and I think that there were some in Tunisia.
Mm-hmm.
But news reporters were like, why is Africa unscathed? Right? Because the expectation for infectious disease, of course, is that Africa would be some kind of epicenter,
Mm-hmm.
because of how we understand Ebola and AIDS and all of these other
Right.
things. And so you had people being like, are Black people immune to novel coronavirus? Is there something about the heat? What are the environmental conditions that make it so that it's not coming to the continent? And really, what it was, it's these just kind of racist controls on travel. So, you know, when every year when there are these big conferences on tech or and artificial intelligence and surveillance tech and all
Mm-hmm.
these other things, you have these huge swaths, excuse me, of African nationals who are not able to come into the United States or come into Canada because their visas are denied. And it is ironically that racist regime of passports and travel that for a short time kind of insulated Africans from the virus. Of course, there were still people who were coming from Europe, um, both like African, like nationals from like African countries as well as Europeans traveling. What we saw a lot in South Africa is the reason, like, there are so many cases concentrated in the Western Cape where Cape Town is. And
Mm-hmm.
Cape Town obviously has like a very large proportion of white folks.
Yep.
Um, and there was some news, I think, that came out in January that said that EU restrictions were going to loosen for South African nationals. But obviously, in South Africa, like, who are the nationals that have the money to pay for these extra, like, expedited travel,
Right.
visa, whatever's to move to the continent? It's white South Africans. Um, and what I was really worried about then in these kind of former apartheid countries like South Africa and then also Namibia, where I was that it was going to be these rich, white South Africans, white Namibians traveling in and out of the country who would then get their like gardeners and domestic workers sick, who would then take the virus back to the townships. Um,
Mm-hmm.
because of like what we saw in Brazil, right? With that woman who came back from Europe, um, had tested positive, didn't tell her housekeeper, and her housekeeper ended up dying. Um, so that seems to be kind of what's happening with like local transmission. Now it's not just people having it brought into the country, but what we're seeing on the continent, it's like it's very much still this kind of associated with like wealth and the ability to travel out of the continent initially. Um, and so, yeah, it was so stunning, like, you know, watching these Europeans like introduces a bit dramatic, but functionally introducing this
Mm-hmm.
virus to communities on the continent.
Right.
Um,
Because
when
travel,
the
yeah.
fear is always the other way around, that Africa is this viral thing that needs to be contained,
Right, right,
you
right.
know?
Yeah, no, I just wanna, I really want people to know and grasp just what anti-Blackness is, because I feel like there's a lot of conflation or there's a lot of like non-acknowledgement of like what exactly anti-blackness is. So can you, I guess, yeah, for people who might not know, could you like expand on anti-blackness and its relationship to COVID-19? I mean,
Yeah.
right now.
I mean, whew, where do we start? I mean,
Yeah.
on the continent, okay, we'll start with kind of continuing with Africa. On the continent, anti-blackness looks like,
Mm.
you know, when President Trump banned travel from continental Europe and from Great Britain, everyone was like, "This is unconscionable. It's a travel ban and it's racist and da 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 da." The way that so many African nationals are consistently denied travel to Europe and the United States, like that is also functionally a travel ban.
Mm-hmm.
That there are so many countries in Africa that, one, not only were on this Muslim ban list that President Trump put together, but also the freedom and the ability to move just doesn't exist in so many ways when it comes to the way that like borders are securitized. But in the United States, the way that anti-blackness and COVID kind of intersect, it's like when we think about racial capitalism, right? Not just capitalism, we think about racial capitalism. Race is the means through which like class is materialized. When we
Mm-hmm.
think about resources being allocated and distributed and the inequities of that distribution, we have to think about race, right? Especially when we think about an entire ethno-racial group having been formerly enslaved. You have an entire
Yeah.
population of indigenous people that, you know, the state's intention was to kill all of them. And it is no wonder that we're seeing such staggeringly high rates of COVID-19 in indigenous communities, you know, with communities being sent body bags instead of
Mm-hmm.
proper equipment for testing and for treatment. And with Black communities, you know, what we're seeing is that there's so many Black folks that occupy kind of low wage labor roles where they're not able to socially distance, where they are designated essential workers, but not giving the kind of pay and um, and leave that allow them to like properly protect their family. Not only that, but you see the way that they're treated while they're at work. You had the woman in the UK who was spat on when she was working on the London Underground and she ended up dying. You have another Black woman in the UK. I'm just really bad with names. I'm forgetting names, unfortunately, but who literally called the hospital to request treatment, and they told her that she was not a priority. Um, that is so consistent with the history of Black people and medical care in the United States, that where um, medical treatment and medical practices and procedures, you know, were literally tested on Black people to be made
Mm-hmm.
available to others.
Yes. Yes.
Um, and it's been really horrific, right, to watch this, because there's already been so much ignored data and information about environmental racism. And then, you know, when we think about coronavirus as something that affects, you know, the respiratory and cardiovascular systems, the reason, part of the reason, you know, people keep talking about Black people's pre-existing conditions, but the way that they're talking about it makes it sound like being Black is a pre-existing condition. It's like, no, being poor, being
Mm-hmm.
exposed to pollution, to other kind, like pollution in the water, in the soil, in the air, being
Mm-hmm.
you know, subjected to substandard to diet and nutrition, and not having the opportunity to exercise, and all of these different kind of lifestyle related behaviors that affects your kind of community based outcomes. Like, you know, Black
Right.
folks didn't stand a chance. And we're not even also talking about the history of medical racism as far as like the trust in the medical system, right? People don't want to
Truly.
go get
No.
vaccines, they don't want to get tested because they don't trust the
Mm-mm.
hospitals, and there's very good
There's
reason.
no reason to.
You know, there's such a good reason not to trust hospitals when we think
Yeah.
of Tuskegee and we think of the
Sterilization.
tests that were run in the Terre Haute prisons and in all
Mm-hmm.
of these other um so it was just the state of kind of Black American relation to the government. to medical structures and institutions, to labor, and everything. You know, it was really stunning. There was a piece of data that showed in New York the different boroughs where they had, it was looking at mail forwarding data. And there were some pockets of Brooklyn where like the number of apartments and properties where people were getting mail forwarded out of the city were staggering, because you have all of these gentrifier folks in Brooklyn who have other properties outside of the city. And just like rich people have done throughout the ages, whenever plague or something else broke out, they ran out of the city to their homes upstate, or to Connecticut, or wherever else. And, you know, some of the poorest, most vulnerable folks in the city are screwed and just left, you know, left there.
Fuck Connecticut.
Sorry, that was a long answer.
No. I appreciate it. It makes me angry that it's been such a long time of the inception of the state, the inception of slavery, the afterlife of slavery, the police representing a kind of the ghosts of slave patrol, basically, you know. And yeah, how that's all very interrelated, and how you know, right now, a really good friend of mine, Mary Sanyanga, was just talking about like how it seems like people are in the acknowledging anti-Blackness, right? People are more interested in the kind of, they're not really interested in systemic institutional kinds of changes. They are doing these kinds of, I don't know, almost these very superficial things to address their own anti-Blackness. Whereas I'm just like, you need, if you really are truly invested in Black life and in solidarity with Black folks, you will work towards abolishing the state. You will work towards upending, you know, this country as we know it, because it's inherent, you know, to it holds it together. It holds not only our country together, but civil society, you know, together. And I feel like what you're talking about regarding passports is very, I have so many feelings about passports and identification, and how that is weaponized against not only indigenous peoples, but also, you know, obviously undocumented peoples, and how it is its own tracking system. Absolutely. And it's not only a tracking system, but it's also something that allocates humanity by way of this, you know, this piece of plastic or paper, or
and what color it is.
And how if every single person right now were to just burn their piece of plastic that displayed who they were, the whole world would be in shambles. Like there would be no access to so many things that are tied to the state allocating resources by way of you having this kind, almost selective compassion or positionality within, you know, the confines of like what the state doles out as approved to give resources, or approved to own land or rent space. You know, it's really confounding that we continue to replicate it, because we have to, we're coerced to, you know. It's not like people really want, you know, like that's the life goal, but the violence when you don't have one is is quite, you know, stark, raving, you know, just gratuitous if you don't have these pieces of plastic or these identifiers.
There's a
And yeah.
couple of like concepts that this calls to mind.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is one that really changed a lot of the ways that I understand how the world kind of works in terms of
Okay.
states interacting. And it comes from Harsha Walia's book, Border Imperialism.
Okay.
And it thinks about not
Yeah.
only the function of borders as like literally um, like showing where the physical boundaries of where countries begin and end, but it's to think about a border as a regime of administration.
Mm.
Because there are some places in the world where you've crossed a border and you have absolutely no idea that you've crossed it. And then
Mm.
there are other places like, you know, the southern border of the United States that are incredibly securitized.
Mm.
And
Weaponized.
the attempts to
Yeah.
cross it both legally and illegally um, are very kind of heavily regulated. The second concept is one by I think it might be French. His name is like Bigot, Bigo, but he has this concept of the Banopticon. So like Foucault's Panopticon, but with a B. And it's this kind of portmanteau of ban and panopticon. And it's looking at the kind of structure of surveillance that permits people to enter or forbids someone from entering a country, kind of thinking about like biometric data,
Yeah.
facial recognition, as well as, you know, the assessment of risk of your nationality.
Mm-hmm.
So when my sister came to visit me when I was studying in England, I had to write her um, like a letter of recommendation or whatever, because she had, I think she had a Zimbabwean passport at the time. And Zimbabweans, for a lot of different reasons, because our government has been shit for a long, long, long time and people have been trying to leave, um, to a lot of states are designated high risk.
Okay.
Um, and
Right.
so if you're high risk, there are obviously all of these extra hurdles that you have to jump even to just go on holiday somewhere. Never mind trying to move or claim asylum. Like there was a time when lots of Zimbabweans were trying to claim asylum in the US and the US stopped taking them. And so a lot of them ended up going to Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so those two concepts for me, um, I think really inform how I think about the function of the border, um, as both a keeping um, in, especially, you know, when we're thinking about keeping in the United States, you know, Americans not being able to go to Europe right now, not actually being able to go to Africa right now unless it's like an emergency. And then you have the crisis of UCIS not being open. And so I was reading something, and there is a huge backlog right now of people applying for passports, applying to renew green cards, applying to renew all kinds
Mm-hmm.
of residency documents, work documents. You know, we just saw the president basically trying to strong arm universities into opening by saying that all of the students on F1 visas, unless they're in face-to-face classes, have to go back to their home country. And it's like, my father came to the US on an F1 visa. And so much of this is making me think about, you know, if my parents had tried to come to the US a few years later than they had, because it took them a really long time to get citizenship, um, what would be going on in my household right now? What would be the crisis if, you know, I'm an American citizen. I was born in the US. My parents were both naturalized in like 2000, both 2000 and like 2003. um they came, if they would have come 15 years later, you know, we would be having all kinds of problems because my brother and I were both born before my parents were citizens, and they're trying to do all kinds of things around like attempting to rescind naturalized citizenship. um
Mm-hmm.
and I, with the state setting up that office to specifically look at citizenship fraud or whatever, um the really scary thing about emergency powers and emergency moments like this is like the emergency pandemic is the perfect cover for the expansion of authoritarian power.
Truly,
um and it's and
from
it's and it's
jump.
and it's been
Mm-hmm.
so horrifying, like looking at the way that the state has been able to finesse people off of unemployment, the
Mm-hmm.
ways that they are so willing to make people's children and adults and parents and chronically ill people and disabled people and low wage workers and everyone just kind of sacrifices for the economy, an
Right.
economy that was already in decline. And magically they were able to salvage billions or trillions or however many dollars of this kind of relief for corporations, where if we really believed in the free market, wouldn't we allow corporations to fail if they weren't solvent? And if, you know, so it's,
Yeah.
we're realizing that capital, if the state doesn't want it, if kind of big business doesn't want it, there are not limits and restrictions on capital in the way that they continue to insist that there are when we are asking for the expansion of Medicare and Medicaid, when we are asking for free tuition, when we are asking for all kinds of social, for childcare, when we're
Right.
asking for like community whatever. You know, there's
Right.
money for everything, right? There's money for billions and trillions of dollars of whatever the fuck space program that Trump wants to create. But there's not money to ensure that people are able to get tested regularly, that we can figure out how to trace exposure without investing in all of this horrific surveillance technology that is like deeply invasive and kind of relays infrastructure for some kind of dangerous spying down the road, even more dangerous than we already have.
Right. Right.
Um,
There isn't even enough. Like, I mean, the Comrade mutual aid networks are the ones that are having to create personal protective equipment for
Absolutely.
hospitals. These are
Yes,
hospitals.
absolutely.
And I guess I just wanted to go back to the part where the a vast percentage of Black folks are incarcerated,
Oh God.
um, and you know, just the toll of just the I guess the capitalist logic, but also the anti-Black logic behind the facilitation of prisons right now. It's really it's it's something like 44 percentages of deaths in prisons have happened because of COVID, and that's more than years and years of death sentences of a state sanctioned death sentences. And these are people who are also seen as essential workers,
Mm-hmm.
and also having to go to work to create the resources that we outside of, you know, the carceral society are utilizing. So like, you know, you have soaps and you have sanitizers and things that aren't even being allocated to the people that are creating them.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And they're
and
still firefighting right now.
that, but like that's also a thing that was acknowledged in California. There were, I forget which news outlet was saying that please, you know, be careful with your fireworks because we don't have the capacity, like
To send
the
them out.
infrastructure to actually send these people out to, you know, fight fires for us who are incarcerated, for who aren't getting paid pennies, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So it definitely is tied to the prison industrial complex, is tied to historical slavery, chattel slavery, and
And in
yeah,
this other way,
wild.
it's so, to me it's so related also to this really horrific present streak, ongoing streak of violence against trans women, especially, you know, Black trans women, because
Yo.
we know the way that the prison places people into cells and holding facility based on genital presentation, and if that doesn't work then they're put into administrative segregation. And we saw what's happened to Layleen Polanco, who did not have to die in solitary. I mean, no one should be put in solitary, full stop, because it is torture. No one should be in prison, full stop. But it's just like when we learned about the details of what happened, they just let her they just let her be there. And it's
Yes.
so illustrative of kind of the whole kind of prison system, just allowing people to die, instead of figuring out ways to get them out of prisons. And it's like we've been hearing about people who are on hunger strikes right now, who are on like work stoppages right now, and we're seeing kind of testimonies out of these institutions where they're like, we're not being given masks, we're not able to like, we're not even getting proper food right now,
Piles and piles of bodies.
we're not we're not able to get people's bodies out, we're not, it's like all of the really horrific conditions that have existed for many years, but in the moment of a pandemic where it's like there's such high traffic of correctional officers coming in and out,
Right.
it's just made for a perfect, and then with like San Quentin, you know, the transfer of people from a place where there were many cases in a jail to a jail that had no cases. Like
Yep.
the prison administration is literally spreading this virus that is running
Mm-hmm.
through prisons. And
But
when we
not only
think about
are
prisons as sites of medical neglect, people being deprived of antiretroviral drugs, of cold and flu
true.
medication, not being given
Yeah.
hormones, not being given mental health care, like this is already a space of like medical violence, of sexual and gendered violence, of like ableist abuse, of so many things. So of course this is a context where it's going to thrive, and it has been thriving, and it has been horrific to watch.
Right.
You
Truly,
know.
truly. I think I really want to, you know, obviously state abolition, prison abolition, police abolition, because they're also related. You know, the police are the ones who facilitate getting people incarcerated.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a lot of conversation right now happening regarding um, within the context of trafficking and like what that looks like. And like, I have been made very aware of like what the anti-trafficking movement has been doing the last few just weeks of them for years calling this kind of certain sex worker or certain people who are against sex work, but for sex workers are like, that's trafficking regardless of consent, regardless of, you know, what you're doing with your body. You don't really like trying to, you know, manage the fact that like people are consensually doing these things. Some people at least are doing these things without taking into account, and by using the idea of calling sex work modern day slavery. And I find that wildly anti-Black, because it steals from the language of actual slavery, and it also doesn't take into account like you're challenging people who have formulated their own means of resources outside of institutional support, including the institution of marriage, by the way, which marriage is extremely anti-Black and extremely patriarchal and sexist. And I don't know why none of
Oh
these
my God, I feel you.
folks have an analysis regarding marriage, because it seems like they're all married. But anyway, I think it's wild that they're not taking into account the trafficking, quote unquote trafficking, that is happening regarding prisoners being exploited for their labor. And exactly that. Look at people fighting fires. It's like that. Like, why are y'all having the onus on sex workers right now,
Right.
in lieu of the prison industry, in lieu of work in
I mean,
general?
it's just because sex work is, they're easy targets, right? Like it's
Yeah.
not this kind of holistic understanding of like labor being, or labor under capitalism being fundamentally exploitative, right? It's just this attempt this to control this moral panic specifically around sex as being labor. But
And
the thing for
trans,
me,
you know, it has a lot to do with trans women too, because so many trans women
absolutely,
and trans people are, they are, you know, sex work is obviously a thing, an economy that they're kind of thrust into, but also would rather prefer, considering the transphobic economies that you have to opt into to live.
And the thing that's really messy around the modern day slavery and what the kind of anti-sex workers kind of think about with trafficking is that legally, well, first of all, the modern day slavery thing doesn't kind of take into account that there is a whole spectrum of agency and coercion, that no labor is like 100% agentic or like 100%, well, there are things that are 100% coercive, like, let me not say that, but that there is not such a kind of clear distinction between something being empowering or not empowering. Like when I was working in a bookstore and working in retail, and I had to just, suck it up when people were horrible to me. It wasn't sex work, but it didn't feel empowering, despite the fact that I was like selling books and talking about literature all day. Whereas, sex workers that I know and like other ones that I've encountered, it's such, depending on what kind of work you do, it can be such a kind of oscillation between something being a little bit more kind of agentic and within your control and something being a situation that is more coercive. But the thing about trafficking in the way that is kind of legally designated is a lot of things can be trafficking. If your friend drives you across state lines, that can be trafficking. If you have a friend that you work with that like helps you with your money and helps you with appointments and you're both sex workers, that could be pimping, right? Truly, depending on who
the law, there are definitely
on the law, on who's interpreting the law, whatever. So there are all of these like legal specificities that classify certain engagement, regardless of how actually agentic it is, as this relationship of coercion and of violence, and is criminalized as such. And so when they're talking about trafficking and modern day slavery, one person came up to me one time a few years ago in Oakland, and they were telling me about sex trafficking, and I was like, tell me more about sex trafficking. And I was just pushing them. And I was like, well, what about this scenario? What about this scenario? What about the fact that the majority of trafficked labor in this country, or trafficked peoples, are forced into these other kind of non-sexualized labor positions, especially in the agricultural industry? What do we say about that? And why don't we care about that? Because we interface with that on a much more regular basis, I would say, than with sex workers. I think. I don't have the stats on this, but this is, what I'm assuming about food.
Because more people are really, really on like their straight and narrow Christian path or whatever, and they're willing to scapegoat and demonize actually peoples who participate in this form of labor, not even calling it work, which I find really fascinating, considering there are peoples who, like we said, are people with disabilities who can't, it's like when we think about work, like not everybody can actually work. So that is probably more unethical than but in any case, with people with disabilities, it's like people can't afford to, their bodies can't be in motion from not 9 to 5 every single day, 5 days a week, to make a livable wage. So often at times they might revert to things like sex work or other means of work that are outside of, the
legality,
mainstream economy, like legal, economies. And that's not taking it into account. It's like you're literally erasing the existence and experiences of a lot of people. But I guess we have about 10, 11 minutes or so. No, we've been at it. I appreciate you so much, because this is you're just a brilliant mind, and I did want to give the last 10 minutes to like just the foundations of anti-Blackness, and how even when people are trying to attempt to acknowledge their own internalized, like it's just more than an institution. It's more than yeah, it's more than interpersonal. And I wanna read something that I just want to read something to you really quick and
Please.
have your assessment of it, because I read it earlier today, and it was reposted from this group that I'm aware of called Anarchipelago Anarchipelago.co. And so it's like a part of a panel, and I talked a little bit about it today, but I'm gonna read the first, maybe the three paragraphs. They're pretty short. Says reflection, because the whole thing is talking about anti-Blackness, well, the caste system, which is basically anti-Blackness within the context of the Philippines, and how, you know, at the top it was Spaniards who were white, and at the bottom it was negritos, who were like, literally translates
Darker
negrito
skin.
is
Yeah.
little black people. So this was like a reflection at the end of acknowledging caste systems and colorism, or as I don't even want to say colorism anymore. I'm just like, just say anti-Blackness, just say anti-darkness. So it's a reflection, and it says, let's reflect at this aspect of our community and how it actually perpetuates white supremacy and anti-Blackness. Let's learn more of the dark history of colonialism in the Philippines so that we can dismantle these behavior patterns in ourselves, our families, and communities. Once we unlearn the colonial mindset, then we can learn our real culture, and we can be better equipped to recognize, protect, appreciate everyone's cultures and differences. What is your... I just want to know what you think about all the words that I said, because there was one word that was just so glaring to me that that I just couldn't.
What was that word for you?
It was dark. So they were saying, let's learn more of the dark history of.
I wasn't sure if that was deliberate. I wasn't sure if they were trying to make a pun.
I mean, to me, I read it as like, you're allocating dark with, because it talks about anti-Blackness, but it doesn't really address anti-darkness in the entire like pieces of like unraveling like what the caste system actually is. And I was like, yeah, I just wrote, I understand it might just seem like words or that I'm reaching, but that these color associations they create are socio-symbolic order.
Totally.
And when I think when you can't disembarkate dark from negativity, even as you're trying to function against anti-Blackness, what does that mean in the world around us that is color coded? What does that mean to darker skinned people? What does it mean for people who, belong in the social category of Black? It's like, for me, like, I can acknowledge that I have mad privilege out here in the so-called, like, what they call it, the main island, because I grew up in Hawaii, but I also grew up out here. And no, like, I had mad privilege out here. I still like went to a pretty white school in Illinois, and was made fun of a lot for being one of the three like kids of color in the whole school. And then moving to Hawaii, it was a complete shift. There were three other white kids in the whole school. Everybody made fun of them, except when I would come across other Filipino kids, they would, to make fun of me, they would be like, oh, well, you're, you just a nigga. And like, like, it's like, wow, like, understanding that this is bigger than just like white people. This is actually my own Filipino people. And understanding that in the Philippines, if I were to grow up similarly in Hawaii, I would experience that same kind of anti-Blackness. But this was just a kind of almost like a Freudian slip up on their part. I feel
It's
like,
interesting. Yeah.
it's like they like, oh, it's dark. Colonialism is so dark, and it's like, well, let's unpack what you think about darkness.
Totally.
Like, I really want people to really stew on that, because
Absolutely.
it has historically been shaping like our whole material and immaterial realities.
I think that what struck me and what kind of strikes me as continuously really frustrating in these conversations about anti-racism, where everyone is talking about, I'm going to strive to do better and to be better and whatever, is this constant reduction of racism, of anti-Blackness, to a kind of individual failing that can be remedied through education. And education is positioned as this moralizing thing, right? Because all we need to do to get rid of racism is to cure the individual of their discriminatory ailment, and we'll be done.
Yeah.
And what I think is very frustrating is that, but then also the fact that people are not treating racism like a material structure, that people are not treating racism as a thing that is literally impacting where people live, how much money they're able to access to buy or rent homes, where where they're able to buy food and what kind of food they're able to buy because of food apartheid structures, the medical systems that they have access to, the schools that they have access to. Like, there's all kinds of epidemiological data that can link someone's life expectancy to their zip code, because of the kind of like spatial mapping of what kind of things that they have within a certain radius of their home. And so we're talking about anti-Blackness and we're talking about racism without understanding that this is a geography, that this is a spatial project, that race making is about the placement of bodies and communities into space, into borderlands, into these kind of diameter strips around the border where people are able to be accosted by federal immigration authorities,
There are
into these geographies of like racism isn't just about discrimination, it is about like strategic deprivation. It is what Ruthie Wilson Gilmore talked about, like susceptibility to premature death.
Yes, proximity to, yes, definitely.
It's literally this economic, social, like material enterprise, and we keep just talking about it as like not hiring well enough, which of course that's important.
Or between me and you, like, it's
like, of course
it's
that's important. But like,
yeah,
everyone is talking about like it doesn't matter what your corporate brand is if you are making these beautiful and empowering t-shirts and using like sweatshop labor and not paying your workers in Bangladesh, which a lot of people are not doing. It doesn't matter how like radical your environmental transparency or whatever is if you are contributing to pollution with your factory runoff, or with your air, or with the kind of like poor air quality that your buildings are spewing. Like, if you are contributing to like environmental racisms, if you are contributing to the polluting of groundwater and soil, it doesn't matter what you're like. If you support Colin Kaepernick, it doesn't matter if you support Washington changing their name, it doesn't matter what you do if you are literally contributing to like the material inequities of anti-Blackness. For me, if companies were not saying things but were literally transforming the way that they interacted with neighborhoods, if they were literally changing the way that they hired, if they were literally changing the way that resources were being distributed, I would have no problem. They could say absolutely nothing. They just be quiet, move in silence, like cheese and lasagna, like whatever. I don't care. Like, what are you literally doing? with
Mm-hmm.
your resources? And what are you literally doing with the ways that you are interacting with Black people and Black communities? Like, what are you doing?
They put a banner that said Black Lives Matter. That
Bitch, I don't care that shit, man. I really do not. Although I am a huge proponent of like everyone taking these racist ass indigenous mascots away. Like,
true, yeah.
Like please, literally, please do that. Like with the quickness. Like we should have been done that like 50. This should have never happened.
I mean, there's so much to be said about that too. I often argue, and I'm like, feel like I'm alone. Like, remove all the monuments to slavery, racism, white supremacy, and anti-Blackness. Yes, that means removing and extracting these racist mascots, these statues of like these.
It means getting rid of prisons,
colonizers, but it also means, yes, getting rid of prisons. But I argue also that it means getting rid of the pieces of paper and coin that have white slave owners on them. Are monument. These are literal monuments. And the thing about removing like Junipero, Serra, and like all of these other statues is that is symbolic. Yes, it's symbolic, and it doesn't really transform our social relationships. However, burning your dollars with these white slave owners on them and continuously ritualizing their worth, ritualizing the necessity and valuation of whiteness and capital and proprietary sentiments, that would actually change our social relationships. That
said, though, you remember when they were trying to put Harriet Tubman on the 50 or whatever?
No,
I do not support that. I do not support that one bit.
Yeah.
I was like,
I'm
no.
Like, wait. If you try to bankrupt the world for its anti-Blackness, sure, put her face on that shit.
But if you're literally putting this enslaved woman onto a money, are y'all are doing a lot.
No. Oh shit. We have 2 minutes left.
Dang.
We have to say our goodbyes. This was such an amazing conversation.
So good to see you.
You too. Oh, we gotta like chill one of these days when you know pandemic is well, let's just say that we're gonna chill. But yeah, no, I just thank you so much, and I wanna
this was wonderful.
Amazing and brilliant writer and thinker, and I appreciate you so much.
And you're the best, and I've learned so much from the way that you think about like carcerality and violence and indigeneity and anti-Blackness and everything over the years. Like I've so deeply so deeply appreciate you.
Thank you. I mean, like I don't know what this moment, you know, it's not even, it's just hard to think about the future, you know, like what is it gonna mean for so many people, and it doesn't seem hopeful, but at the same time it does in some way. Like it's like
the mutual aid stuff that I've seen, like the way that trans women have been bossing up for ages and ages, and like
it's wild. It's a wild time to be alive. But I'm glad to be here, and like we got work to do before we return to the land, and I can't thank you enough. We have like 10 seconds left, and
and everyone, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you. Stay dangerous, y'all. Bye.
Bye.